Materialists is a rom-com where we follow Lucy, played by Dakota Johnson. She works for an agency that matches singles with incredibly high standards. She reconnects with her ex-boyfriend John, played by Chris Evans, who lives a very modest life while pursuing his acting career. As old feelings resurface, she ends up meeting a wealthy man named Harry, played by Pedro Pascal. The two of them end up dating, but her love life and her career struggles end up leading her to question what actually makes for a fulfilling relationship. So this movie is not just about materialism, though that is a big part of it. To sum up the core subject more accurately, it's really about superficialities. It's about the surface level things that people often prioritize when selecting a romantic partner. This movie highlights how the dating world is oversaturated with people who care more about impressive but shallow characteristics such as wealth, status, and image, and height and weight and hairlines than they do genuine connection or compatibility. It's not that money doesn't matter at all. Anyone who's been in a relationship where money has become a point of stress or tension knows that it's absolutely a factor. Stability and security certainly play an important role, but when money becomes the primary filter for love, it starts to crowd out the more meaningful things. Everyone is obviously entitled to prioritize traits how they choose in their dating lives, but this movie lightly critiques how people who obsess over idealized checklists can become emotionally detached. The way that characters fixate on anything but genuine affection might be jarring for some of you to watch, but it does accurately reflect how a lot of people go about dating. It's by fixating on these superficial markers that people often reduce others to mere objects or trophies rather than individuals. Lucy does this both in her personal life and her professional life. She treats her clients like little more than puzzle pieces that need to be placed in the right order to create a larger image of what a more shallow individual would call a perfect relationship, ignoring everything that image leaves out. The habits, flaws, traumas, and values the individuals have that shape their relationship dynamics and determine whether it can feel real and sustainable. We'll talk more later about whether or not these notions were fleshed out well, but one of the things that makes Lucy such an interesting character is how questionable her credentials as a matchmaker are. She's supposedly an expert at this, but she hasn't found a match for herself. It makes you wonder how much she knows about real relationships versus just following supposed rules. It's a cutesy premise, but you kind of get the sense that she is trapped by the very illusions that she sells, and perhaps even living vicariously through her clients' successes rather than facing her own romantic reality. There is also some light but interesting commentary on how the level of openness and vulnerability her clients approach her with is comparable to how they approach their therapist, except Lucy is much less qualified to handle those feelings. It's a very brief commentary, but it's one that I think people should really acknowledge and take seriously when considering who they flock to for relationship advice in their own lives. Turning to someone who is not well-versed in emotional or relational dynamics can still be cathartic, but it's worth questioning whether their input is truly objective, whether they're a professional or just a well-meaning friend. So I certainly would have been much less interested in this movie if it weren't made by Celine Song, because the marketing for this movie made it seem like a pretty cliche 2000s rom-com. She's the filmmaker behind Past Lives, a movie I absolutely loved that admittedly made me cry more than any movie I've ever seen. This movie definitely contrasts that one by being about the realities of dating as an adult rather than nurturing our most childlike views on love. If you were to just look at the script for this movie, you would probably think parts of it are too cutesy, but it's through Song's direction that the movie is very quiet and contemplative. There are plenty of long takes during intimate discussions and pregnant pauses filling them, often with no music behind them, which really forces you to focus and feel present in their conversations. And some of them will likely make you uncomfortable because this is not really a feel-good comedy. There is some humor in it, but it's just barely a rom-com. The tone of this movie is a bit of a mixed bag, bouncing between 2000s rom-com nostalgia and modern tension-filled romance with long contemplative dialogue scenes. The script is a mixed bag as well, with its greatest strength coming from those long, tense dialogue scenes. Those are where the movie really shines. Its best dialogue consists of interesting takes that characters have made about the dating world, like how love is easy, but dating is hard. Early on in the movie, Harry makes a statement about how to snuff out characteristics that are indicators of codependency. Even if the takes are not always totally agreeable, there's still a lot of food for thought in some of them. And it begs a lot of good questions. At some point in the movie, a character says, "I don't know if I like you or the places that you take me." A question I think we should all ask ourselves: do I actually like this person, or just what they contribute to the relationship, a distinction that I personally think a lot of people would struggle to make. And then there's the rest of the dialogue that's kind of generic and very repetitive. There's all this talk about formulas and the math being right for characters to be a perfect match. That horse gets beaten to the ground very hard, to the point where our protagonist just kind of feels clueless. Also, with how much the movie takes an overall stance against materialism, I kind of wish there was more of an argument for it, or at least a better argument for it, built into these characters to challenge and oppose the movie's narrative. When a movie, or really anyone, makes a point about anything, it just doesn't feel as strong of a point unless it's being faced with scrutiny. The biggest thing for me with this movie is how small the world feels. All anyone talks about is dating and money. Our protagonist doesn't seem to have any family or real friends, just coworkers. And she doesn't do anything. She offhandedly mentions how she used to act, but that's it. It's hard to get a feel for characters in a movie like this, where it really wants you to feel for them when they feel like they're just tropes or ideologues and not really people. Especially with John, played by Chris Evans. The whole trope of he's a common man is a little on the nose. Like in his last scene in the movie, I was just like, oh, brother. As for performances, Chris Evans stood out the most to me. He shows range within this movie, which is a nice change of pace because I feel like we've yet to see him do anything mentionable since Knives Out. Pedro Pascal was solid, but I feel like he wasn't given a whole lot of interesting material to work with. He has some good dialogue scenes, but performance-wise, he was just fine and nothing really extraordinary. And then there's Dakota Johnson. If this title for my review of last year's movie, Am I Okay, isn't telltale enough, I am generally not a fan of her as an actress. She always feels like she's underperforming, as if she's anxious about taking up a little bit more space, which definitely worked for her character in Am I Okay, because that character had crippling anxiety. How I feel about her in this movie is similar to how I felt about her in Daddy-O. She's not bad, but I do think that this character would be so much more compelling if played by a more flamboyant actress. So this movie, if you would indulge me, kind of reminds me of David Fincher's movie, The Killer. It's not a remarkable story, but it's through his impressive directorial style that so much of that movie works. Similarly, this movie would not shine nearly as much if the script were handled by a different director. It's through Celine Song's thoughtful direction and sharp emotional intuition that the film becomes a more visceral and memorable experience. Yet another movie that I walked out of thinking that it was just decent. I'll put a trigger warning on it for assault being a part of the narrative. If that doesn't bother you and you're interested in a story that analyzes the dating world in a way that's interesting to say the least, you might enjoy this movie. Thanks for watching this review. If it brought you any value at all, please give it a like. It really does help the channel grow. I'll see you next week with my review of 28 Years Later.